So in this video, we're going to tackle all of elasticity, which is actually quite a bit of material to review for one video. It's 2 pages in your review packet, so let's get started. The first question asks about just what is elasticity in general, and elasticity is a measure of responsiveness of one variable to another. And it's the idea of like, how responsive are they? So we'd say that very elastic means very responsive. It responds a lot, as opposed to not very much. And then we'd say inelasticity means not very responsive. It doesn't really respond to the other variable changing. Then we have 2 questions, or a question that kind of relates to demand rather than elasticity, and it's more just kind of stuck in here. It's called the reasons why demand's downward sloping, and there's 2. They're called the income effect, and we'll say the substitution effect. And in general, what we say is that as P increases, people substitute other goods, so QD decreases. That's the substitution effect, that like if the price is to go up, then people will buy less. And the reason that QD decreases is because people are going to just buy other stuff. The other reason why demand is downward sloping is that as P increases, people have less available income to spend, so QD decreases. So usually they move together. There's a little bit of discussion in the text and in some other places about what happens when they move opposite each other. Like, for example, the income effect when a good is inferior. It's unlikely you're going to see a question about that on this year's AP exam. But who knows, right? And if that is something that you feel a little fuzzy on, I would say go back to problem set number 2. Now let's check in on elasticity a little bit. Here, PED is the price elasticity of demand. It's the responsiveness of QD to change in P. And so what we're really saying is, like, if price changes, how much is quantity demanded going to change? So the formula is given as PED is equal to the percent change in QD divided by the percent change in P. And there's a couple of things to remember here. The dollar change always is in the denominator, the down. And percent change is new minus the old divided by the old. And we'll put a parenthesis around this so it's mathematically good there. So just those are 2 little tricks I can give you to remember how to do these. And it's basically put the dollar, whatever one, the price in this case, in the denominator, right? The percent change in price. And how to do percent change is just, no, I don't want to do percent changes. So that's a quick way to remember that, right? There's only 2 O's. Now, if price elasticity of demand is greater than 1, the demand is elastic. If price elasticity of demand is less than 1, demand is inelastic. We can figure that out by basically observing, like, what if there's a 200% change in quantity demanded and only a 100% change in price? Well, that means the variable QD responded a lot to the change in price. So the PED would be 2, right? 200 over 100. And so it would say the demand is elastic. Now, on the other hand, if the percent change in quantity demand was only 10% and the percent change in price was 100%, right? The price changed a lot, but the QD didn't, then it's not very responsive, so it's inelastic. Now, there are 5 determinants of PED. If you were to Google search a list of determinants of PED, you'll find a zillion different ones. In your problem set, I gave you 5. And it looks like this, these 5 right here. So rather than me retyping all of them, I'm actually just going to copy and paste them right into this review guide. And then I'm going to talk through them really quickly. Substitute availability is the idea of, is it relatively easy for the consumer to find a different product? And if they can't, then there's going to be a pretty inelastic demand curve for it, because that means that if the price goes up and there's no substitutes for it, consumers are just going to have to buy the same quantity. Toilet paper is a good example of this, right? There's not a lot of substitutes for toilet paper, and if the price goes up for it, you just suffer through it and buy the same amount. Share of income. If it's a relatively small share of your income that you spend on the good, then you won't notice when the price goes up or goes down, so your quantity demanded won't change. So we'd say that it's a relatively lower PED. So that's because it's a low elasticity value. It's pretty inelastic. Necessity versus luxury. This is the idea that if the good is a needed product, you absolutely have to have it. Toilet paper, another good example. Then you don't really change how much you buy when you have a price change. So if again they're not very responsive, it's low PED, it's inelastic. Fourth, addictive or habit forming. We wouldn't really say that toilet paper is addictive, but there are products that are, like cigarettes, that have really inelastic values because you have to have a certain quantity, and if you don't, you're not going to feel very good. So be pretty inelastic. And then the last one, time window. In a short time frame, most goods are actually pretty inelastic. If you're right there and you need it right now, well, you're just going to pay the high price. That's why convenience store prices are usually higher, because they figure, hey, if you're buying this product in a convenience store, you need it right now, right? If you're in the airport and you're buying something for the plane, they're going to charge you 5 times as much for headphones in an airport as what you'd get on Amazon or something, or in Best Buy or Walmart. So understand that businesses are acutely aware of this kind of thing, and so they can change their prices. The next part is a graphing part, so I'm going to pop out my stylus here and we'll draw a couple of graphs. So the first question says, show perfectly inelastic, unelastic, elastic, and perfectly elastic demand in 5 graphs. So just a quick sketch is all this really requires. And it's designed to get you to think about, what do these graphs look like? And they all have P and Q, so I'm actually going to not do that. You could feel free to do that, but I'm going to be lazy. Perfectly inelastic is a line that's vertical, and it just has a certain quantity that people buy. They don't change how much they buy no matter what the price is. Then a relatively inelastic is still downward sloping, but it's less so. So you can see it's kind of downward sloping. And the downward slope points to the right, just because remember thinking about like supply to the sky, demand to the dirt. Elastic, or this is sometimes called unit elastic, is that normal looking demand curve. Relatively elastic starts to flatten out, and then perfectly inelastic or perfectly elastic is a horizontal line. And we remember that this curve actually becomes useful when we do Mr. DARP, if you remember. Mr. DARP, that's him. That's the demand curve in Mr. DARP. Now we're going to take a look at, let's see here if I can scroll down just a little bit, and we're going to draw a demand curve and show the relationship between total revenue and demand. And actually we can note that there are ranges of a demand curve's elasticity. So we did this in class, and it's not going to be pretty with me doing it here, but we'll do my very best here. How about that? So we have quantity, and this quantity axis is the same. And up here, we're going to do price, and then down here, we're going to do total revenue. And we're going to say downward sloping demand curve. And at that quantity right there, okay, so this is our demand curve. And then we're going to have about halfway a nice little curved total revenue line. And this is telling us total revenue, if you've forgotten, total revenue equals price times quantity. And so what we can learn from this is actually that there are different ranges within this demand curve. And there's a maximum point, right? The maximum point of total revenue here, the maximum point here corresponds to the unit elastic point. And that's the unit elastic point on a demand curve. And again, if we need to review this more, stop by the office hours or check out the YouTube video where I explained this the first time. We also can see with this range that the price, let's kind of observe here, the price is going down between here and here. And in that same range, the price is going down, the total revenue is going up, right? Between those 2 points, between those two. So what we would see here is the elastic range. So we notice that total revenue is rising when price is falling. That's the elastic range. And then down in this range, total revenue is falling, and the price is falling. And so when you have them moving in the same direction like that, that's the inelastic range. So if you remember when we did this in class, we had our arms and we're waving them around and stuff. And that's the total revenue test for elasticity. And we actually kind of have drawn it here in graphical form. But we could just write, if the price goes up and total revenue goes up, then the demand is inelastic. Okay. And if the price goes up and the total revenue goes down, we're in the elastic range. And obviously these would hold true that if they're moving opposite each other, right, you're stretching out, you're in the elastic range. And if they're moving in the same way, then they are in the inelastic range. And we can move our arms around for that. Okay, now we're going to switch back and start working on the next page, cross-price elasticity. So this is just relating the responsiveness of QD of A to change in P of B. So it's when the quantity demanded of one good, how much does it respond to the change in price of another good? And so we'd say the formula for CPED is the percent change in QD of A, right, divided by the percent change in P of B. So we're just relating again two different goods to each other. So I'm going to erase. Looks like my arm may have put those in there. So then we can see that, like, if it's the same rules as before, if this percent change is really, really big in quantity and there's only a small change in price of B, then we would say that it's really, really responsive, right? But we would also observe that there can be a relationship between these two goods. And that's actually what this thing actually tells us. It tells us the relationship between two goods. And that means, are they substitutes or complements, right? So in some sense, it can tell us how responsive they are, but it's actually more useful to tell us, are they related to each other? So let's kind of think about an example. If the price goes up of one product, and then you buy a whole lot more of the other product, right? These are both positive values, right? You had a positive percent change in price, positive change in quantity demanded, then that tells us that these two goods are substitutes for each other, because when one goes up in price, you buy more of the other. On the other hand, if they're negative values, if the CPED is negative, then the two goods are complements. So let's talk through, that would mean that the overall CPED is negative. So for example, if the price of one good went up and you bought a whole lot less of the other, so there was a negative percent change in quantity demanded, but there's a positive percent change in price, then that means you typically would reduce your purchases of good A when the price of B goes up. And that would happen if the two goods are complements. Now, price elasticity of supply is the responsiveness of quantity supplied to a change in price. And so we'd say the PES formula is percent change in quantity supplied divided by the percent change in price. And this is just of that good. And so this is pretty similar to price elasticity of demand. We're going to go ahead and draw these quick little graphs here to show what these different things look like. So a perfectly inelastic, right, we'll do P and Q just on this one. A perfectly inelastic one is going to be a vertical line, just like before. And this would be like, say, what if maybe you were talking about Vincent van Gogh paintings, or you were talking about seats in a stadium, or something along those lines, where there's a really fixed quantity, and people are basically going to have to, the suppliers are not going to be able to change the quantity, even if the price is low or the price is high. On the other hand, you've got this kind of upward sloping supply that's still very close to vertical. That's relatively inelastic. Then you've got the unit elastic looking one, the relatively elastic, and then the perfectly elastic. And I'm going to be honest, these on the left are more common than these, right? Not as common. Now, the way we interpret these are, if PES is greater than 1, the good is supply elastic. And that means it's relatively easy to change production in response to changing prices. That would tell us that basically you could ramp up production and change quantity a lot if the price changes a little bit. But if the good is less than 1, if PES, is less than 1, it's inelastic. And so it's relatively hard to change production in response to changing prices. Income elasticity of demand is the responsiveness of QD to change in income. And that's in a dollar or in a percent change in dollars, right, of dollars of the income. And so we'd say IED, income elasticity of demand, is equal to the percent change in QD divided by the percent change in income. And again, the dollars go in the denominator, so the dollars always go in the denominator on these. And if the income elasticity of demand for a good is positive, then that means like if your income goes up, you buy more of the good. We call that a normal good. Normal. So maybe we'll put in here, tells us if the good is normal or inferior. And if it's normal, it can also tells us luxury versus necessity, in fact. But it's more typically that we just say that it's normal or inferior. So for example, if IED is small and positive, so really like 0.2 or 0.5, that means that your income goes up, let's say 100%, but your quantity demanded only goes up 20%, right? So it doesn't change a whole lot. Then the good is likely a necessity if its IED is small and positive, because even if your income triples, you're not going to buy that much more toilet paper, right? Maybe, I don't know. But if it's large and positive, it's likely a luxury. If it's negative, we would say it's an inferior good. So that takes you through the basics of the 4 types of elasticity. I hope that it's helped you. I'll see you next time.